Hi YouTube, AC Dodd here, and I thought I would end the tuning season as I did last year and just put together a couple of episodes on my top 12s. So what we did last year, I put a couple of videos together titled What Were They Thinking? So this is What Were They Thinking 2025. And in this particular episode, we're going to kick off with the ignition system. So without further ado, let's get down to my top 12 for 2025. And in at number 12, which is actually down from last year, which was number 11, but we're in at number 12 now, and that's a faulty condenser. So faulty condensers can just be literally the condenser itself is gone faulty, or it's a new one that's a poor quality one that causes misfires, etc. Or it can be loose wires, or the condenser not fitted properly. Now, those who've been following my channel will notice that just a few episodes back, I had a car with a loose condenser. Literally, the screw wasn't tight. There was nothing wrong with the condenser, it was the fitting. But the point is, a faulty condenser usually shows itself up as misfires or just poor running. So effectively, I had seen this again this year, but slightly less so than the previous year. So that's why it's in at my number 12. So moving on to number 11, and that changes from last year's number 12. And this is simple, it's all wrong. So what I mean by that is I come out to the car and actually the distributor's not right, the advance curve's not right, the distributor's worn, the vacuum's not working, the coil's wrong. You know, the HT leads are old and the plugs are knackered. So what I mean by all wrong is we change the entire ignition system, and usually in that scenario, when I'm out on the road, we're changing it for a high power electronic version to replace all that, and obviously make the best use of modern technology under the bonnet of that particular car. So moving on, now we look at vacuum units. So this is quite simple. It's either a vacuum unit that's not working, i.e. it's punctured and it's just allowing air to be drawn into the engine, and obviously it's not advancing the ignition timing, or that could also be the vacuum advance mechanism is stuck because the base plate in the distributor is stuck or jammed by something. And it can also be there is no vacuum unit fitted. So obviously when I'm on the road tuning, I'm typically tuning road cars. All road cars need a vacuum unit to get the best throttle response and the best fuel economy. So coming out to a car, say like an original Cooper S, for example, that doesn't have a vacuum unit in, that car would benefit from a vacuum unit, even though it was a Cooper S, even though it never had one from the factory. It would run better and certainly be sharper on the throttle with a vacuum. So that's what I'm talking about there. So moving on, the next one on my list, which is number 9, and this is the ballast bypass. So what I mean by the ballast bypass is some cars, when you have electronic ignition fitted and you've got variable dwell, people mistakenly fit the variable dwell ignition with perhaps they use the right coil, but they're actually leaving the ballast resistor fitted, and this is incorrect. So when you have a variable dwell dizzy, you don't want a ballast wire on there. On the other hand, we could have a situation where you've got a car that's got completely the wrong setup. So they're using a high power, say like a 65D factory ignition. They've got a 3 ohm coil and they are using the ballast wire, and clearly you've got so little coil power left that the thing runs terribly. So that's where you need the ballast bypass fitted from the fuse box to get full 12 volt to the coil, so that the circuit can work properly as it's designed to. You can also get the other scenario where somebody's fitted a ballast bypass onto the wrong system, and then they've cooked the module. So for example, they believe that they fitted an electronic ignition, they believe it's variable dwell, and it isn't, and it's a fixed 60 degree dwell. They've taken the ballast off mistakenly, and they put a main feed round from the fuse box, the ballast bypass wire, connected it up to a 1.5 ohm coil, and wondering why they've fried their module. And that's because that system with a fixed dwell is designed to have a ballast resistor. So yeah, you don't, again, people don't understand how these things work, so they can't make the right decisions, or don't understand that they need to fit the right set of components, and they need to wire it correctly to match each particular situation. So moving down the list, number 8, and this is the wrong advance curve. So again, this is the same as last year, same position. Wrong advance curves, quite common. People fit all sorts of different distributors into their engines, thinking that it's a distributor of a certain type, it looks the same, so therefore they're all the same. No, it doesn't work like that. They're all different. So added to the fact that if you use old distributors from an older vehicle, that suffers with wear, so it's probably got nothing like the advance curve it had when it left the factory, so you end up with a whole mismatch of advance curves. The other thing is, some of the new distributors that you buy, the advance curves in those distributors leave a lot to be desired, so you end up with a scenario where I come out to check the ignition and the advance curve is anything but what the engine needs. Usually it's usually too slow or too long, or it can also be very short, not enough advance, or no advance. So it does manifest itself in a number of ways. So next up, we've got HT leads. Now this has actually moved down 2 positions from last year, and that's because a lot of people have been watching my videos and obviously fitting the right power spark leads, which I like to fit. So I'm clearly called out to people, watch my videos and obviously look to see what parts I'm fitting, so they're obviously fitting those on their engines before I get there. So that's why it's going in the right direction, so I don't have to do it. But there still are cars that come out to and they've got too high lead resistance. So it's important to work with, when you're working on most minis, classic A series engines and classic cars really, a total resistance between the coil and the spark plug really should be less than 5k. So that's the combination of 2 leads added together. That's the coil lead and the spark plug lead, and really more like 4, yeah, 3, 4, something like that. Once you get down to sort of 500 ohms, that's a bit too low. But I find anywhere between sort of 2.5 to sort of 4 being optimum. So just bear that in mind. Moving on again, we come in at number 6 on the list, and this time it's back to the old chestnut, which we briefly touched on earlier, but fixed or variable dwell. So points distributors and some of the more basic electronic ignition systems have obviously a fixed dwell, and what that basically means is it really determines the coil type, and obviously that determines the spark plug type. So there's a lot of people that are just not understanding that if you've got variable dwell, then obviously you need you don't want to be running a 3 ohm coil, for example. You want at least a 1.5 ohm, and preferably you want a high power module with variable dwell, and then you can run a 0.8 ohm coil, same as the later factory cars did. So that's really what it comes down to. I'm coming out to a lot of cars now, as I did last year, where people are not understanding the dwell angle that they've got in their ignition system, and they're obviously not associating that with, because they don't understand how it works with the right coil, etc. So that's all I'm saying, is really first understanding what type you've got, and then obviously matching it with the right coil. So moving on to number 5 now, again linked with wrong advance curve, but really this is the basics, which is setting the ignition timing. So last year this was up from this was in position 7, now we're up to 5. So what we're effectively looking at now is it's becoming more apparent that people aren't setting their ignition timing right. Now I think what's happening is some of these people have been watching my videos, and they are at least fitting the parts on their car, and then they're trying to tune the ignition themselves. And because they're not developing full cylinder pressure, they drive the car and then they advance ignition timing, and they have the understanding that more advance gives more power. And when they drive the car, indeed it will feel sharper because it's got more timing. The problem is they're actually running the engine typically too lean, so they're not putting the full amount of fuel in the cylinder, they're not getting a full cylinder pressure, so they compensate by what they believe is tuning the car by adding more ignition timing. The problem comes there is you end up with too much ignition timing and a lean condition, and that's, you know, you're entering the danger area there of melting a piston. So you have to be a bit careful when you do that. So the most important thing for people to understand is ignition timing isn't set by just keep adjusting it until you find the best performance. What you've got to really do is understand what's going on in the cylinder to understand what that ignition timing is, because once you put more fuel in that cylinder and you go from a lean to a normal running condition, your ignition timing angle typically retards a little bit back to where it should be for optimum combustion with a full charged cylinder. That's what it actually means. So it's very tempting, and I understand why people do it, because you turn the timing when you haven't got enough fuel and the engine runs better. So I know why it happens, but people need to understand that that's not a good situation to be in. So that leads me down to number 4 on the list, and number 4 is back to dwell angle again, but this time I'm specifically talking about dwell angle on conventional points ignitions. So earlier in the year I reviewed a nice basic relatively cheap dwell meter from Amazon. I think it was 32 quid at the time when I reviewed it. People haven't got any concept of measuring dwell, or they just get the feeler blade out and measure stuff. Well, the problem with the feeler blade is it doesn't take into account the wear on the points, doesn't take into account wear in the distributor itself, and it certainly doesn't take into account poorly ground or misshapen lobes, which is sometimes apparent on some of the aftermarket dizzies, the cheaper dizzies that are on the market. So a lot of those dizzies, for example, it's very difficult to get over 45 degrees of dwell angle, for example. So you're actually losing ignition coil charge time, because that's what dwell angle is all about. It's the amount of dwell time while the points are closed, which means it's the time available to charge the coil. And undercharging the coil when you've barely got enough energy anyway to fire the mixture off properly is always you're always on a downer to start with. So the important thing is, if you've got a points car, what you really need, or points ignition, what you really need to do is to get yourself a dwell meter and make sure you maintain that dwell at the proper setting. Okay, so it's easily done, but you need to remember that this is an older type system and it needs maintenance to keep it there. So if you're using your car every day, for example, every 4 to 6 weeks you'll need to adjust the points. If you're the sort of person that doesn't want to adjust the points, then fit a proprietary aftermarket high power electronic ignition. You'll do away with all that need, and then you can enjoy the benefits of much higher power ignition as well. Now we're getting up towards the top of the list. So in at number 3, and this is a huge change from last year. So this was 10 last year on the list, and it's coil type resistance. So what I mean by that is we've already covered a little bit with the dwell angle and the matching the right coil. Well, you know, this just comes down to, why are people putting the wrong coils on their cars? So they'll get a later car and they'll upgrade what they think is an upgrade. They'll put they'll take the 1.5 ohm coil off and they'll put a Lucas Gold 3 ohm coil on, you know, which is a completely backward step. Because all you're doing is reducing the coil energy and reducing the energy you can deliver to the spark plug. You know, a 3 ohm coil or a high energy 3 ohm coil has really got no place on a modern classic car if you're interested in getting the best fuel economy, the best part throttle economy, and obviously the best power out of that engine across the rev range. So the reality is, you really all should be looking at running, if you've got points, you want a 1.5 ohm or 1.4 ohm coil with an appropriate ballast resistor fitted. That will get the most out of your point setup. If you're running a electronic setup, typically a variable dwell, you either need to run a 1.4 ohm coil again, or better still, have a high power type, which I believe currently one of the only distributors on the market is the Power Spark high energy type, which incidentally is what I carry with me when I'm on the road. But that allows you to fire a 0.8 ohm coil and run a 35 thou plug gap, which is exactly what you need to be doing if you're interested in extracting the most performance, whether it be part throttle, fuel economy, and drivability right the way across the rev range, consistent with good emissions and obviously maximum power. So try not to get into a situation where you've got, say, a car from the 80s which has got either electronic ignition or which will be a high power type, or it's got a points ignition with a ballast, and then fit in a 3 ohm coil. You're just taking the car from the 80s back to the 1960s, which is a completely retrograde step. So moving on to the top two. I wonder if you can guess what this is, and it both involves spark plugs. So in at number 2 is the spark plug type. So we have people still fitting the wrong heat ranges. Now, I know where part of the problem is here, because the original manufacturers of, say, like NGK, for example, have in their parts manuals that a 9 on 8 will use a 6 spark plug. Well, actually, back in the day, those catalogues didn't say that. They said a 5. So where I'm coming from now is you need a 5 for a 9 on 8 unless it's highly tuned, okay? And you need a 6 heat range spark plug for a 1275 in standard form or mildly tuned. It's only when you get up to an engine that's really highly tuned with a higher compression ratio that's then used a lot. A lot of the heat range is down to how the duty cycle and how the engine's used. If you sit in traffic all the time with a highly tuned engine, you're never going to get those, say, 7 spark plugs, heat range spark plugs from NGK, up to temperature. So you're going to fail those plugs. So you're better off in those situations running a slightly cooler plug. Slightly warmer plug. So where I'm coming from here is really plug range or plug heat range is as much about selecting the right grade versus the specification as it also is about how you're using the vehicle. Okay, and that's why it's important to learn to read your spark plugs. So the top one for the second year running, and I think you could probably guess it now, is gapping your spark plugs. People are still not gapping the spark plugs. They take a plug out of the box, put it straight in an engine. Trust me, if you've got a car with a 3 ohm type coil on, you put a 35 thou gap plug in it, it doesn't run well, won't start properly, cranks over a few times to get it going, it may even misfire. So where we're talking about here is you must get the right gap for your spark plugs. So to try and make it easy for you, if you've got a 0.8 ohm coil, it's a 35 thou plug gap. If you've got a 1.4, 1.5 ohm coil, or any of the 3 ohm coils, it's a 25 thou plug gap. It's as simple as that. So, with all that being said, hopefully you got something out of that this year. You can see the differences that I've seen on this year's tuning, and obviously there's some big changes there, especially the coil type resistance moving from 10 to 3. We've also got the fixed or variable dwell. That's come down from 3 to 6, so that's not too bad. It's going in the right direction. There's a few changes there in a year, but the main culprits are still there. Number 1, spark plug gapping. People are still not doing it. If you can learn something out of this video, is gap your spark plugs to suit the application you've got, and that means the right coil and have the gap to suit that. Anyway, as ever, please like, subscribe, share, hype this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.